I still remember the moment my son-in-law, Mark, looked at me across the living room and laughed in that quiet, sharp way of his. Not the kind of laugh a man gives when he's amused, but the kind he gives when he believes he's above you, smarter, richer, stronger, more successful. He sat there with his legs crossed, tapping the side of his expensive watch, talking about my simple life, as he called it. He said it with a smile. But the kind of smile that hides a knife behind it. You know, David, he said, some people just never grow past their small-town mindset. They don't aim high, so they never fall. That's the good part about, well, your kind of life. My kind. That's what he called me. I didn't say much. I rarely do. I've lived long enough to understand that arguments don't change a man's nature. And I've met enough loud, showy people to know that confidence built on money is a fragile kind. But that day, something in me hurt. Not because of what he said. I've been insulted by sharper men in more humiliating ways. No, it hurt because my daughter Emily sat beside him, quiet, uncomfortable, forcing a smile, pretending she didn't notice the disrespect. I raised that girl with the best parts of my soul. I taught her kindness, respect, humility, all the values a father hopes his daughter marries into. And yet she sat beside a man who didn't understand any of it. But I stayed calm. I always stay calm. And if life has taught me anything, it's this. People who look down on others often rise so high in their own imagination that they forget how quickly they can fall. Mark didn't know it yet, but life was already preparing a lesson for him. A quiet lesson. A simple one. The kind that doesn't need anger, only time. I live in a small, peaceful suburb in Oregon. A simple single-story house with white walls, a wooden porch, and an old oak tree in front that's been there longer than any of us. I worked 32 years as a high school history teacher, not a glamorous job, but one that gave me meaning. I've never been rich, never wanted to be. I had enough. Enough to build a home, raise a child, love a wife, and sleep at night without worry. My wife, Linda, passed away 7 years ago. Cancer. It broke me in ways I don't speak about. She was the gentlest soul I ever met. Emily inherited her softness, her thoughtfulness, but she didn't inherit her mother's eye for reading people. That's why she never noticed who Mark truly was. He worked in finance, Wall Street, before moving to Portland. Sharp suit, sharp haircut, sharp opinions about everything. For him, life was a ladder, and every person was a rung. You step on them or you stay below. When Emily married him, she said he was ambitious. Driven. A man with plans. I didn't argue. A father learns to pick his battles. But over the years, I watched the small things, the jokes he made about people with normal jobs, the sighs when bills came, the way he corrected Emily in public as if she was a child. He wasn't cruel. Just arrogant. Blind to his own flaws. My son Michael, who lived across the country, noticed it too whenever he visited. Dad, he would say, that guy doesn't respect you. Or Emily. Or anyone really. I would shrug. Life has a way of teaching people like him. I didn't know how true those words would become. And I didn't expect that the lesson would unfold in my own living room. The day Mark crossed a line he should have never touched. It happened on a cold Sunday afternoon. Emily had invited both Mark and me for lunch. She made roast chicken, her mother's recipe, and the house smelled warm and familiar. It should have been a peaceful day. But Mark arrived irritated. I've had the worst morning, he said, dropping his coat on the couch. The car shop is taking forever with my brakes. And your father's driveway nearly ruined my shoes. Emily rushed to take the coat, apologizing even though she did nothing wrong. I quietly ignored the comment. I've learned that insecure people often attack harmless things, driveways, shoes, the weather, because they can't attack what truly bothers them. We sat down for lunch. For 10 minutes, everything was fine. Then the conversation took the turn Mark had been waiting for. So, David, he said, leaning back in his chair, what have you been up to? Still fixing things around that old house of yours? I smiled politely. Keeps me busy.
That's good, he said.
Some people need simple tasks. Helps pass the time when you don't have bigger responsibilities. Emily lowered her gaze. She knew where this was going. Mark lifted his fork. You know, sometimes I wonder what it's like to live without real pressure. No big decisions. No major risks. Just mowing lawns and reading books. That sounds peaceful, I replied calmly. It sounds small, he insisted. But I guess it fits. Some people are made for big waves. Some for puddles. He said it with the tone of a man who believed he was being clever. I didn't react. When people mock you, they expect emotion. Surprise. Anger. Anything that shows they struck a nerve. Silence, on the other hand, unsettles them. But Mark wasn't satisfied with silence. You know, he continued, sometimes Emily and I talk about how different our worlds are. I mean, she grew up here, simple home, simple values, simple father. And now she's living in a world of investors, analysts, big moves. It's a big jump for someone raised in such a humble environment.
Emily flinched.
That was the first time she looked at him with something like disappointment.
I stayed silent, though my heart tightened.
Not because of his words, but because he said them in front of my daughter.
He kept going.
It's like raising someone to think too small, and then expecting them to suddenly fit in a bigger world. That was when the fork slipped from Emily's hand. Mark, she whispered, that's enough.
He shrugged.
I'm just being honest.
Then he looked at me again. Directly. You did your best, David. I mean that.
Not everyone can raise high-achieving kids. But it worked out for Emily even though she had limited guidance. I looked at him slowly. Not angry. Just observing. What makes you think success is measured by the size of your world?
I asked. He laughed.
Because that's the only measure that counts. And then he said the sentence that pushed everything to the edge. You should be grateful Emily married up. She saved you from having a mediocre family tree. Emily gasped softly. That was the moment everything changed, not for me but for him. And he didn't even know it yet. Because fate had its own timing. And right then, at the height of his arrogance, the front door opened. My son Michael stepped inside the house. He flew in as a surprise. Emily knew, but didn't tell me, wanting to make my day better. And in a way none of us expected, he was right on time. Hey Dad, he said, smiling as he walked over to hug me. Then he noticed the tension, the stiff air, Emily's red eyes, Mark's frozen smirk. What's going on? Mark leaned back casually. Just having a conversation. Nothing serious. Michael looked at him the way a doctor looks at an X-ray, calmly, but deeply. Emily stood and hugged her brother. I'm so glad you're here. Michael nodded, then turned to me. Dad. I simply said, we were talking about success. Michael understood more than my words said. He took a seat at the table, and his presence alone shifted the atmosphere. Michael has always been calm, composed, but there's a weight in his silence that makes arrogant men uncomfortable.
Mark forced a smile.
Actually, I was just telling your father how different life can be when someone grows up in a small world. Michael rested his elbows on the table. A small world. Yes, Mark replied confidently. Look, I mean no disrespect, but older generations didn't have the opportunities we do. They don't really understand high-level work.
That's fine, of course.
Everyone has their place. Michael stared at him gently. Is that so? Absolutely. Some people play in puddles.
Some in oceans.
I saw Michael smile faintly. A smile I recognized. A smile that meant someone had unknowingly walked into a silent storm. And Mark didn't even see it. Tell me, Mark, Michael said calmly, what do you do again?
Mark straightened, proud.
Senior financial strategist at Redwood Capital.
Michael nodded.
Ah, the firm that got investigated last year for predatory consulting practices.
Mark blinked.
That was blown out of proportion. Michael didn't respond to the defensiveness. He simply continued, voice steady. How's your division doing? I heard they've had 3 major client losses in the last quarter.
Mark's jaw tightened.
Temporary setbacks. Part of the business. Michael's voice remained gentle. Is that why your team's performance rating dropped to 3rd tier?
Mark stiffened.
Where did you hear th? Michael didn't let him finish. Mark, he said softly, I was asked last month to take over a restructuring project for Redwood Capital.
He waited a beat. Your firm. Mark froze.
Emily covered her mouth.
I stayed still.
Michael continued, calm as water. They wanted an outside strategist to analyze the weaknesses in the team: leadership, morale, client handling, strategic planning. I reviewed everything.
Mark swallowed. Then Michael added,
And I read the performance reports of every senior member.
Silence. Real silence.
Not the kind you choose, but the kind forced on you. Mark tried to recover. Look, Michael, that's confidential information.
Michael nodded. Yes, it is.
And that's why I won't speak the details.
Then he leaned back.
But I will tell you the conclusion I gave the board. Mark's breathing shifted. My recommendation, Michael said, was that the division's poor performance came from leadership that prioritizes ego over collaboration, image over ethics, and arrogance over actual skill. Emily stared at her brother. Mark's face went pale. Michael wasn't done. And I told them that unless leadership changes, the division will collapse in the next 2 fiscal years. Mark's lips barely moved. You said that.
Michael nodded once. Calm. Certain.
And then I declined the project. Because I don't take pleasure in dismantling people's careers. He let that linger. Then he added the quiet strike. Especially when those people are connected to my family. Mark closed his eyes, just a blink, but long enough to reveal the fear behind them. It was the first time all day he had no words. And the lesson began settling into him. Arrogance looks powerful, until reality speaks with facts. Mark wasn't mocking anymore.
He couldn't.
Because the man he believed was simple had raised a son who understood both oceans and puddles, and could drain either one with a single sentence. Mark didn't speak for a long moment. He looked at his plate, then at Emily, then at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked small.
Not humble.
Just afraid to see himself clearly. Michael finally broke the silence. You know, Mark, he said gently, Dad may live simply. But simple is not the same as small.
Mark swallowed hard.
Michael continued, voice calm and grounded.
He taught us honesty. He taught us patience.
He taught us work that has dignity, even when no one is watching.
You chase money. That's fine.
But don't confuse wealth with worth. Emily's eyes filled with relief. Michael leaned forward slightly. You mocked the man who gave you a family. The man who raised your wife with love. The man who never once disrespected you, even when you deserved it. Mark attempted to speak, but nothing came. Michael wasn't attacking him.
He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult.
He simply spoke truth so gently that it cut deeper than anger ever could. Then he added one more thing. And for what it's worth, the board will revisit that restructuring project in a few months. If you want to save your position, you might want to start treating people better. That landed with quiet force. Mark looked at Emily with shame. I'm sorry.
She didn't smile. She just nodded. Then he turned to me. David,
I was out of line. I disrespected you. I shouldn't have spoken to you that way. I looked at him, not unkindly. Arrogance is loud.
Wisdom is quiet.
You'll understand that someday. He lowered his eyes. Michael softened his expression, He wasn't trying to destroy him, only to open his eyes. Just remember, he said, a man isn't big because he stands tall. He's big because he stands right. For the rest of lunch, Mark remained silent. Not brooding, thoughtful. Something inside him had shifted. Maybe not fully, maybe not enough. But it was a start. That evening, as they were leaving, Mark approached me again. "I'll do better," he said quietly. "For Emily, and for myself." I nodded. "Good." He hesitated, then added with honesty I hadn't heard before. "And thank you for raising Michael." I smiled. He raised himself. I just gave him a compass. As they walked to their car, I saw Mark hold Emily's hand more gently than he ever had. And I knew something within him had cracked, the shell of superiority he had lived inside for years. Sometimes all it takes is truth delivered without anger. Later that night, the house was quiet. Michael and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset through the branches of the old oak tree. He didn't bring up the confrontation. He didn't need to. I finally said, "You didn't have to do all that." He shrugged. "Maybe not. But some people mistake kindness for weakness. And you're the kindest man I know." I smiled softly. "Kindness isn't weakness." "I know," he said. But Mark didn't. We sat there for a long time, letting the breeze pass, letting the day settle. Then Michael added, "You know, I didn't speak up to embarrass him. I just wanted him to understand that respect isn't optional. Not in a family." I nodded. And I think he finally understood. Michael leaned back. "Do you forgive him?" I thought about it. "Forgiveness," I said, "isn't for the person who hurt us. It's for the person who carries the hurt." He nodded slowly. "So, you forgive him?" "Yes," I said. "Because resentment weighs more than truth. And I prefer to travel light." He smiled gently. When he went inside, I stayed on the porch a little longer, watching the sky darken. I thought about my daughter, about her marriage, about the world she lived in. And I realized something important. Mark's arrogance wasn't the problem. His blindness was. The kind of blindness that comes from living in a world where people confuse wealth with wisdom, noise with intelligence, confidence with character. But that day, he learned something. Not because I fought him. Not because I argued. Not because I proved him wrong. No. He learned because the truth revealed itself naturally, through Michael, through consequences, through life's subtle balance. And that's the best kind of justice. Quiet. Undramatic. Inevitable. Before I went inside, I whispered something into the night. A message for myself. A reminder for anyone who ever feels belittled. Sometimes silence is the best revenge. And I meant it. Because silence isn't empty. It's full of patience. Full of dignity. Full of truth waiting for the right moment to speak. And when that moment comes, even the loudest voices fall quiet.